What 3 things are non-negotiable in the world of David Moyes? That was a question just given to him by Jake and Damien on the High Performance Podcast, which is a fantastic podcast anyway. But they had David Moyes in the hot seat this week, and it is a brilliant listen. I'll put a link in the description below and the comments so you can go check it out. So I'm doing a video about their video, and then I'm going to ask you guys to leave your comments under this video about my video or their video. Bit confusing, but I enjoy doing these videos actually, because this podcast is thought-provoking. That's the point of it. While you're listening, you start thinking of things. It almost G's you up a little bit to go and do something. They're really good listens, because it's a deep dive into the mindset of David Moyes, and it's a side of David Moyes you don't really get to see, because we judge him as a manager on his tactics on Saturday afternoon. What you're going to do, who you're going to play, that's what we see as a manager of David Moyes. This is an insight into David Moyes, the manager, Monday to Friday. How do you manage the players? What's your discipline like? What's important to you as a manager? How do you succeed? How do you act and how do you react as a manager? And this gives you an insight into the thought process of David Moyes. And I have to say, I think it's absolutely brilliant. And I've got 4 bullet points written down here, just 4. The last one says, like him more. It's as simple as that. By the end of the podcast, I found myself really warming to David Moyes a little bit more, almost willing him to succeed at West Ham even more than I did, almost becoming a David Moyes fan, taking the West Ham side of it away. I obviously want him to succeed because he's the West Ham manager, but remove the West Ham side of it. I almost want him to succeed as David Moyes. I know a lot of people right now will be thinking, well, this is a bit mental, surely he did this anyway. What I'm basically trying to say is I like him a little bit more. I found myself really warming to him during the podcast, and it was a thoroughly enjoyable listen. Now the other three bullet notes I've got is Mark Noble. Felt bad, I felt bad at one point, we'll get into that, and his team around him. Something I don't think we talk about enough. I speak about it regularly with 1 or 2 people, and I want to discuss that as well. By the way, the answer, the 3 non-negotiables, it's not a spoiler, you already know what they are. You can guess what they are. It's discipline, commitment, attitude. They're sort of interlinked anyway, aren't they? They drive each other. The attitude drives the discipline, the attitude drives the commitment drives, you know what I mean, they're all the same. It's not like, what do you want for tea? Oh, soup and chips. They don't really go together, do they? Those 3 things, discipline, commitment, attitude, do go together. And it's evident throughout the podcast. They ask him that question at the very, very end, but during the first 50 minutes of it, it's quite clear that 3 things is important to David Moyes throughout his career, not just at West Ham or at Everton or anything in between. While he was a player as well, he was committed. His attitude was bang on, and you learn things about David Moyes you didn't know before. I certainly learned things about David Moyes that I didn't know before. Brilliant listen. Get it, listen to now. Link in description and the pinned comments. Now I'm going to do my little thought process on it about those 3 bullet points. But before I do, this video is sponsored by the OneFootball app. You can get it downloaded also via the link in the description below. It's completely free. You can keep up to date with everything going on at your football club, including what David Moyes is up to and how he's going to get over that bad news to Kurt Zouma. I found out about it through the OneFootball app last night. Put the preview live. Bosh, there we go. But 5 minutes later, I had a thing from OneFootball. Kurt Zouma is going to miss Thursday night. Oh, wonderful. Just what I needed to see. Thank you very much, OneFootball. But it does the job. I got the notification on my phone because it's major West Ham news. They only send you notifications for the big news. When the lineups come out tomorrow night as well, before we take on Lyon, you get a notification on your phone telling you the lineups for Lyon against West Ham. And the app is completely free, as is the podcast. So get it downloaded, the app, and get it listened to. The podcast, both links are in the description below. Now, where will we start? Let's start with his team around him. Something I don't think I discuss enough on this channel. I'll discuss it with friends in private, and that is how important is the team around David Moyes, his backroom staff, to David Moyes' success as West Ham manager. And to some extent, in order to prove this, you need evidence, I think. I think whenever you come up with a theory, I think you need to back it up with a bit of an opinion, obviously, but as much evidence as possible. And the podcast almost generates a little bit of evidence in this, because when he's discussing his time at Manchester United, one of the reasons he feels he perhaps struggled or didn't do quite as well as he would have liked is because of his backroom staff. He didn't have anyone that Alex Ferguson had. When Sir Alex left, they all left, kind of thing. And he obviously took his team with him from Everton. He remained loyal to them. And I don't think he regrets that part, because he goes on to speak about how loyalty is important to him. I think his regret is not being able to retain some of those that Sir Alex had in order to keep a little bit of consistency there, but also the knowledge and stuff, because he speaks about how the mentality and the attitude from Everton to Man United was different. When he turned up, he said you could almost feel the difference of their mentality, the winner's mentality, their ego to some extent. And I guess the coaches at Everton probably just hadn't dealt with that at Man United, so it would have been different for his team as well as himself. And it gets you thinking about West Ham, because we've often wondered just how good is the backroom staff at West Ham United. And when I speak to my friends, they suggest that that's a large part of David Moyes' success, if you like. And I never understand why this has to be perceived as a negative thing. I've often felt if I said that out loud, people would say that I'm discrediting Moyes. I'm not really. If anything, I'm praising Moyes for assembling that team. I think it's important to have a team behind you that is on the same page as you, that has the same ethos of you, but also you've got enough people in the background that are different, that have different opinions and see things differently. And I think Moyes, going by the success at West Ham over the last couple of years, and when you rewind, when you go back to when West Ham became good, if you like, under David Moyes after lockdown, what happened in that time when he came back for the second time? Well, he took more people with him. The first, Stuart Pearce was there the first time, but he came back again eventually once the dispute was finished with the owners. But when you look at the teams he's assembled, Kevin Nolan, an upcoming young coach with managerial experience, but Stuart Pearce, managerial experience that Moyes worked well with at West Ham previously as well. Then we've got the likes of Alan Irvine. I know he's not part of the coaching team this season, but he was last season. Still involved West Ham in a consultancy role. He's got McKinley in, who he knows. He's got Nevin there, who's involved with England. He's assembled a really good team. And I think if you were to sort of listen to what Moyes is saying in the podcast, you do wonder if the big telling difference between sort of Man United and Everton and Man United and West Ham to some extent is his backroom team. And I just think it's one of those things that goes underappreciated, I guess, at West Ham. And when I was listening to the Man U part, or when he was talking about the Man U bit, that's what was ringing in my ears about the team he's got now at West Ham and how important that is to the success of West Ham and of David Moyes at West Ham. Now, more importantly, or I guess to some extent, is the Mark Noble thing. So in the podcast, they were speaking about Phil Neville and what he did for Everton, about how he brought Neville in and it just changed things. He became an instant leader and how he was almost like a human shield for the rest of the team. And he had this mentality that he'd taken from Old Trafford to Goodison Park. And then they were speaking about leadership. And then Moyes himself started speaking about Mark Noble. He wasn't asked about Noble. Moyes just started talking about him and how good Noble is and how he's working with under 23s. And earlier on in the podcast, Moyes speaks about his career, I guess, as a coach and how he got into coaching from player to coach to manager. And I think Noble's almost doing it on a quicker scale, if you like, not as a long period. It sounded like Moyes done it for about a decade. Noble's trying to do it in a few years, but it's a similar path route where player, while coaching, going to watch under 23s, getting involved in the academy at West Ham, and then obviously Moyes had a good manager. Moyes learnt under good managers and had a good chairman. Noble's obviously got Moyes to work under as well, and Moyes speaks about Noble passing on his leadership to Rice. Well, I think we can safely say Moyes will be doing the same with Mark Noble. He'll be passing on a different kind of leadership to him. But anyway, the reason I bring up Noble, because it was thought-provoking. I'm probably going too far with this, but just hear me out, okay? Just hear me out. Because he speaks about how important Mark Noble is, and this is what the podcast is, I guess. This summarises what the podcast is. It's like I said, it's not about, hi, Mr. Moyes, why did you sell Sebastian Haller and not bring anybody in? There's lots of questions like that. I'd have completely different questions for David Moyes than what Jake and Damien had, because they're interested, the mindset, the psychology side of it all, and then, like I said, you get a different side of Moyes. So when Moyes is speaking about Mark Noble, he's not speaking about Mark Noble as what he can do on the football pitch. He's speaking about what Mark Noble does off the football pitch, his leadership, how important he is for David Moyes. This goes back to the backroom staff. The backroom staff's perfect. Well, Mark Noble's probably the perfect captain as well for Moyes and for West Ham. And obviously he's leaving this summer. So when I'm listening to it, it got me thinking really, because Moyes also stated he wants 2 or 3 leaders in the squad, but that's it. He doesn't want more. He doesn't want any more leaders than 2 or 3. Otherwise, it's too many chefs, isn't it? You know, too many chiefs and not enough Indians and all that. It's sort of like you get too many big voices in there. It becomes difficult to manage. You want 2 or 3 big leaders and that's it. That's how Moyes likes it. So it makes you think, right, clearly Noble and Rice is 2 of them. Is there a third one that Moyes has got when he's talking about West Ham? We don't know. But let's just assume there is. Let's say he's looking at Ogbonna or Creswell as one of those people. So Noble leaving this summer. I know as fans we always say, well, hopefully we don't lose Rice or we lose them both captains. But I think to some extent, I think we almost underestimate the importance that Mark Noble has. And when I listen to this podcast, I've always known Mark Noble as a big captain. I've always defended Mark Noble as a captain, as a club captain and stuff. And, when people get a bit not upset, when some people don't like it when Noble comes on the pitch with 5 minutes to go, comes on the 85th minute, Rice gives them the armband. Some people say, well, what are you doing? That's like an ego thing. I've always defended that. I said, no, that's important. That is almost like Mark Noble's the captain. It's important. It's just respect. It's knowing your place and stuff. And I think, so Mark Noble leaving, how big a loss is that going to be? Do we have a replacement? And I don't mean Connor Coventry coming in because he's a centre midfielder. I don't mean signing Alex Crowell permanently because he's a centre midfielder. I don't mean replacing Mark Noble's position or his shirt number. But as a captain, do we have a replacement? Hopefully it's Declan Rice, but if we lose him as well, does David Moyes then need to go and sign a leader in the summer? Not a centre midfielder. Well, we know we need a striker. We probably need a centre midfielder. We might need a left back. Might need a centre back. So on and so forth. You know the positions, right? But let's just say you've got 4 positions. In those 4, does one of them need to have the characteristics that David Moyes saw in Phil Neville in order to bring him to Everton? Does he need to come in and almost become captain immediately? A bit like what Kieran Trippier done at Newcastle. He came in, Eddie Howe said, there you go, captain's armband on you, son. There you are, leader. Do West Ham need to buy 4 positions, essentially 5 players, because one of those needs to have that leadership that we're going to lose with Mark Noble? And like I said, I'm probably reading far too much into it, but this is what the podcast does. This is what the podcast is meant to do. Thought-provoking. Get ya thinking. That's what I was doing. And speaking of getting me thinking, I was feeling guilty at one point because he speaks a little bit about social media and how he doesn't have it. He's always been tempted to dip his toe in the water because he'd like to put a couple of opinions out there, but he's never done it. And I understand why, by the way. I completely understand why a manager wouldn't do it. I completely understand why a Premier League player wouldn't do it as well. I say Premier League, but any footballer. I understand why they wouldn't do it. But he then said, when he was at Manager Preston, people would write in to the letters page on a Thursday, because this was their former social media back in the day, wasn't it? So 5 or 6 fans would write in every week saying, why is Moyes picking this team? Why is Moyes picking that player? And Moyes would read the paper and think, wow, you little, what do you know? Come on then. Like Moyes would get aggravated by it. And he then spoke about sort of what that negativity does to not just a manager's mental health, but a player's mental health as well, and about how some of the broadcasters these days and radio shows, one in particular, but he didn't name them, he said there's a radio show that encourages people to ring up and answer the question, do you think this manager should get sacked? And I start feeling a little bit guilty because we do similar, don't we? We sit on here and give our opinion and criticise David Moyes for his lineups and praise David Moyes for his lineups as and when it suits. And we also will then suggest what we need to do in regards to selling players, buying players, the manager's performance and stuff. So I felt a little bit guilty for a moment. But at the same time, I thought, oh, you know what? I'm honest. All I can be is honest. But listening to him speak like that, and it's almost just a reminder at the end of the day that he's human. I know it sounds really silly, but I think sometimes you forget that they are human, and I think it's possibly because of the money they earn to some extent. Almost you feel like they live in a little different world, their own little bubble. But even if they do, they still have feelings and they still do listen to things. I've always felt like sometimes, I'm not saying this YouTube channel or that, I'm saying I've always felt sometimes that people in the game will read social media or something just to see what's going on. And I don't necessarily mean Moyes or Declan Rice or David Sullivan, but people at the club would try and have the finger on the pulses and see what's being said and whatnot. And I just felt, for that moment, I felt a bit guilty because I'm perfectly aware I wasn't David Moyes' biggest fan when he returned. Okay, I'm aware of that. I've admitted that many times. I'm not going to do another video saying I was wrong and Moyes is the right manager for West Ham. I've done it enough. I'm not doing that again. But what this podcast did, I found myself warming to him a lot more than I did. I found myself rooting for David Moyes because obviously, as a West Ham fan, you want Moyes to be successful because he's the manager of West Ham. Moyes is successful, West Ham is successful. That's how it works. But I almost found myself becoming a David Moyes fan by the end of it. I almost found myself rooting for David Moyes and hoping that David Moyes has success because at the end of the day, once he leaves West Ham, when he leaves West Ham, there's a good chance, there's a high probability that his next job will be Scotland manager. So I've then got a second interest there. But even if he goes on to another club, I hope he goes on and does well there, because it's taken me a little while, but I warmed to him as a manager of West Ham. But this podcast, I warmed to him as a manager. Not of West Ham, just a manager. I liked it. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Do check it out. Links in description and pinned comments. It's just ever so slightly under an hour long, but it's really worth your time. Get listened to. Leave your review of my review in the comments, or your review of David Moyes' podcast in the comments. Either way, I'll be back tonight to have a read of what you're saying. Tomorrow night we are live just before 7 PM with our build-up show for the Lyon game. Cannot wait. This is exciting. Bad news about Kurt Zouma, obviously. But after listening to that podcast with David Moyes and my 4 bullet points, well, I'm hoping that he's got something, a trick up his sleeve and something up there to see West Ham with a line. Right, drop a like on the video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you're new around here. Myself and Gonzo. We'll catch you tomorrow night.